All right, Keith, are we ready?
Thank you, Keith, for sending that link to me. After the meeting, can we have an offline conversation about how to troubleshoot this in the future? If not today, then tomorrow.
Sure, Ryan. Yes, Chairman Mahler, we are ready.
Okay. Thank you. We have, this is the Thursday, March 18th, 2021 meeting of the Board of Directors of the Ann Arbor Area Transportation Authority. The quorum is present and we'll begin. Item number 1 is to approve the agenda. Can I have somebody move that into the record? Kathleen, seconded by Roger. Any changes or anything else to the meeting? All right, if not, we'll just call the roll for the approval of the meeting. Mike?
Yes.
Rich?
Yes.
We don't have Sue yet, right? Okay. Raymond?
Yeah.
Roger?
Yes.
Ryan?
Yes.
Jesse?
Yes.
Kathleen?
Yes.
Yes. Kyra?
Yes.
And I'm also yes, so the agenda is moved into the record. Next, we'll go to item 1.2, excuse me, public comment. If you have any comments for the board, you can take up to 3 minutes. Please state your name for the record. Either hit the raise hand button, or I think it's star, I should know this by now, *9 if you want to raise your hand on your phone. Keith, do we have anybody who wants to address the board this evening?
We do. Just one moment. I will put up the post to remind people how they can join.
Okay. So,
And we have a raised hand. This is Mr. Robert Pulowski. Mr. Pulowski, you've been unmuted.
Can you guys hear me at all?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. New headset, just want to make sure. Good evening. Hope you guys are staying well, staying safe. Happy late St. Patty's Day. Kind of late, but why not? First thing I'd like to start off with is I just saw the post on your guys' site for TheRide, restarting April 26th. I want to thank you guys for that. That is that it's just, you know, going to make it easier for me to get out and spend more money in your guys' area. I really appreciate that. The one thing I have for you guys only tonight is your guys' fleet. So back in October, you guys, I don't know if I mentioned this in a previous board meeting, but I'm just gonna, if I did, well, oh well. So the fleet that you guys introduced back in October, were a bunch of Nova buses, and they're running, and there's certain ones running right now in the Ann Arbor area system. Do you guys have plans in the future to fully upgrade your guys' fleet to all Nova buses, or are you guys going to keep half of the fleet, the new Nova buses, and half of the fleet, the old Gilligs that you guys have, and half of the new Gilligs that you guys have? I prefer that you guys would keep the old fleet, because the Nova buses are, there's not as much seating on there. They're mostly those kind of buses are mostly geared to ADA passengers from my experience with those. So I would suggest keep the fleet with the half of the old Gilligs and new Gilligs, and half of Nova buses on certain routes that are needed, like Washington. The Nova buses would be good on the Washington routes, especially, you know, for peak times of the day where it gets packed. But what are you guys going to do going forward with the fleet in terms of the future? But that's the only concern I have. And I also would like to let you guys know, if you guys would like to get any more insight or comments or any suggestions on my insight of your guys' system, you guys have my email on file since I registered for this. feel free to shoot me an email, or we could do a one-on-one conversation via phone call if you guys choose so, or via email, whichever. I would like to hear your guys' updates and insight as well, and I would love for you guys to hear my insight as well to improve the system. But anyway, that's all I have for you guys besides those 3 things. Hope you guys have a great rest of your week and weekend as well, and stay safe. Take care. Oh, almost forgot. Robert Pulowski of Southgate in Wayne County. Thank you guys. Take care.
Thank you. Keith, do we have anybody else?
Yes, we do. We have Mr. Jim Mogensen. Mr. Mogensen, you've been unmuted.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes,
Okay.
we can.
All right. So, so about the proposed permanent service restoration new normal. This is a matter of messaging to make sure people, as pointed out in the service committee, to make sure people realize that this is now, we've gone past the service, the pandemic service restoration, and we're moving towards the more permanent new normal, to make sure people understand that, as opposed to being one of the new series of service restorations. One of the things I did notice is that I did not see the Title VI analysis of the proposed changes, and that should happen soon. And I want to say a couple things about that. The first is, so you had you updated the program in November, but that the program is not the analysis, right? So even though the program includes a lot of analysis from the former permanent service, and when you look at what Houston did, when Houston redid its service, its Title VI study was 6 PowerPoint pages long. And it was completely inadequate, and has pointed out to me now, in the midst of the chaos that's happening with the vaccinations, the people who were left out of that service can't get to the vaccination sites. So the point of that is to say that it needs to be a robust Title VI analysis. Second thing is that it should start, and this is a new unprecedented thing, it should start with the old permanent service. So this is permanent service measured against new permanent service. Those changes are, and that's to avoid having a situation where you're saying, well, we're adding more service, so there's really no problem. So, and as you might imagine, I will continue to comment on these things and give you further input. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Keith, do we have anybody else who wants to address the board at this time?
Yes, we do. We have Ms. Michelle Barney. Ms. Barney, you've been unmuted.
Do you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Good. I would like, if I've been reading these pages of your new plans. As I understand it, you still are not going to have an after hours. TheRide East does not go anywhere near Chichester after hours. Is that right? There is still no plan to include us in the evening or in the weekends after hours. Is that, do I understand that right?
I don't know if somebody from the staff can answer that question off the bat or off the top of their head, or we may have to respond to you at a later time. I don't know,
Well,
Matt, if you could jump in there.
I will at least say that I'm very glad to see these hours extending, especially during the week, but on weekends too. And are you being notified? There is a very definite, not just plan, but actually happening to vaccinate all the senior high rises by Washtenaw Public Health. Are you being notified as a building gets the vaccine? I'm talking about 200 to 500 people, so that you have some notion of how the situation is changing in terms of health and safety for passengers and drivers.
I'm sure somebody from the staff can respond to that as well. If not now, probably directly after the meeting.
Because, for example, somebody on the staff might want to know. I mean, of course, we're still wearing masks and everything, but Chittister Place, Monday, the 15th, Washington Public Health came in with pre-planning and vaccinated the whole building with the J&J, Johnson & Johnson vaccine, the one and you're done. And so that will affect the number of people who want to go riding on the buses now. People are less afraid to go out. Yes, we still have to wear masks and face coverings and take precautions, but a lot of us are much less afraid to go out than we were. And I think that's wonderful. Yeah, I'd like to know from the staff, and if they'd like me to report the buildings, because I'm involved in some of that and I learn what they're doing. If somebody would like to have it reported as to when a large building gets vaccinated, I'd like to know who that would be so that I could tell them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Keith, do we have anybody else who's waiting to address the board at this time?
No, we do not, Chairman Muller.
Okay. So we'll close the public comment period 1.2 and then move on to general announcements 1.3. I think there's one key general announcement that we want to make, which is that this is unfortunately the last meeting of our CFO, John Metzinger, who will be moving on to another opportunity. And it's been publicly known now, so I have no qualms about saying it here on this meeting. And that's an unfortunate loss for us, but it's going to be a fortunate pickup for the next lucky employer for John. So John, we wish you the best and we wish you well. And I have here on the screen a resolution that the board is going to adopt, and I'm going to read it into the record so that we can all see it and hear it. This is Resolution 2/2021. Whereas John Metzinger joined TheRide on May 22nd, 2017. And whereas John's last day as a member of our team will be April 9th, 2021. And whereas John has accepted a position as the CEO of another transit agency, and whereas John has served as TheRide's first chief financial officer, providing strong financial leadership and advice throughout his tenure. And whereas John led the establishment of many changes and new approaches that will benefit the agency and our communities into the future. And whereas John has been an excellent example of integrity, sound judgment, and strong leadership. And whereas the board of directors wants to express the appreciation for his contributions, let it therefore be resolved that the board of directors expresses its thanks to John Metzinger, Deputy CEO for Finance and Administration, and wishes him success in all his future pursuits. And can I have somebody move that into the record?
So moved.
Seconded by Mike. And we'll call roll to approve the resolution. Mike?
Enthusiastic, yes.
Rich?
Most definitely.
Sue?
I'm here, yes, sorry.
It's okay.
I had to swallow my dinner quickly.
Raymond? It's a little
With mixed
TMI,
emotions.
Sue. Roger?
Absolutely, yes.
Ryan?
Yes.
Jesse?
Yes.
Kathleen?
Heartfelt thanks, yes.
Kyra?
Yes.
And I'm also a rueful yes. So thank you, John, very much. If you have, maybe we can put you on the spot and let you take the floor for a minute to wish a fond farewell to TheRide publicly.
Of course. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, board. you have surprised me tonight. I did not expect this. So kudos to you. Someone's been sneaky. But truly, this has been such a great honor to serve this organization. You know, the board and the staff here are excellent. And I don't know that the citizens of Ann Arbor and Ypsilanti really know what they have in you. You know, we've made excellent progress together. And so I appreciate being recognized and honored like this, but it's absolutely been a team effort. I have a great management team in my division, as well as great leadership from Matt and from the board. So, you know, the work that you all do, the service that you provide is something that I'll treasure for the rest of my career. You know, I'm going to be continuing on board here for a few more weeks, so it's not goodbye just yet. And so I hope that we'll have another opportunity to be in touch. But thank you for this gesture and recognition tonight. I truly appreciate it.
Thank you, John. Anybody from the board want to say anything at this point?
I wanted John to know that not only will the people in Indiana be happy that he's leaving, there are some people in Michigan that are happy that you're leaving, John. Those are the CFOs of other government organizations who now have a choice to win some awards.
Very good. Jesse?
Yeah, I want to say this. This hurts. John, you were one of the you and Matt both were the first people I met when I was considering joining the board, or under consideration for joining the board. And you know, I started off on the finance committee, and I was really nervous about that. And what immediately struck me was this amazing combination of competency and kindness that I was not expecting from. I just wasn't expecting. I asked tons of questions because I didn't know what I was doing, and you answered every single one as if it was, you know, insightful and worthwhile. Never made me feel like it was like I was wasting your time. You never talked down to anyone. And I just think that's just so incredible. And as I've wrote in an email to Matt, I feel like you have set an amazing standard for what we should be expecting from our CFO. And I think Matt has his work cut out for him in finding your successor. So thank you very much. Fort Wayne is very lucky to have you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jesse.
Yeah, for my part, I remember the breakfast meeting that Matt and I had where I said, I don't understand why this organization's never had a CFO. I don't get that. And Matt was like, thank you, because I was kind of thinking the exact same thing. And I said, well, you know, you need to find one. And he set the bar. I mean, we have to give kudos to Matt here for finding and locating you. Matt has a very keen eye for really good talent. And I don't know what he told you to sell you to bring you here, but hopefully he can sell the next person on it too, I hope. So thank you, John, for everything you've done to right the ship in this organization and put us on a path for future success. We have to thank you too for a keen eye for talent, to bringing in people like Latasha and others who have helped you know, right the ship and will steer us into the future. So you know, the mark of a good leader is they left the organization in better shape than when they found it. And you know, you passed that test with flying colors. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Eric.
Yeah, golf clap, everybody. Okay.
Eric, you're muted.
I'm sorry. We'll move on then to consent agenda. Minutes and from the previous meeting, board meeting and committee meeting reports. Could I have somebody move the consent agenda into the record?
So moved.
Roger, seconded by Rich. Any questions, concerns about the consent agenda? If not, we'll do the roll call vote. Mike?
Yes.
Rich?
Yes.
Sue?
Yes.
Raymond?
Yes.
Roger?
Yes.
Ryan?
Yes.
Jesse?
Yes.
Kathleen?
Yes.
Kyra,
Yes.
and I'm also a yes. Thank you. Section 3, policy monitoring and development. 3.1, committee meeting discussion. Any questions, concerns about any of the items that were in the committee meeting reports? Any questions or comments from the chairs of the committees that they'd like to point out? Okay. 3.2 then, we'll move on, board retreat feedback. I just wanted to give a few minutes to the board to publicly discuss their thoughts about the board retreat, give some feedback to each other and to the staff about what they thought, what you think next steps might be from here, and how we might move forward with what we discussed. So anybody with any impressions or feedback or direct feedback they would like to give each other or the staff at this point? Roger?
Well, it was both very well organized and an enormous amount of information, very well presented. I would hope as we discuss this further, we have some opportunity for some sort of, blue sky thinking to after we've gone, processed all the enormous amount of data that, again, was very impressive. But I hope at least either in committee or in board meetings, we have a little more opportunity to discuss what the very long range future of both our transportation system and transportation systems in general might look like. So.
Yeah, I mean, just to respond to that, I think we always, we always struggle at these retreats with balancing the huge amount of information with enough time to discuss it all. And there's always kind of that tension in between, but certainly, we would err on the side of having too much information than not enough. So yeah, I thank you for mentioning that, Roger. Go ahead, follow up.
And just further mention that, Zoom meetings are not the ideal format for wide-ranging discussions. It's a little difficult.
Yeah.
Face to face.
Anybody else? Jesse?
Yeah, I think along the same lines, with so much information, I did come out of it feeling just very excited about having more conversations and doing a deeper dive into some of the individual topics through the long range planning process, and it just has me very excited to for this work. I'm looking forward to meeting with consultants when appropriate. As Matt likes to say, it was like drinking from the fire hose, but I'm looking forward to being able to dig into some of these topics in a more measured way going forward.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Anybody else? There's certainly a lot more to come, and this will come up at the next governance committee meeting. We'll be planning future steps, recommending some future actions that I'm sure will come up at future board meetings for this. Rich, were you going to say something? I don't know if you went off mute for a reason.
Yeah. So just to be brief, I found it to be extremely helpful and useful, and it's not often, especially nowadays, that you're in a training, especially in Zoom, and you sit there and next thing you're like, holy crap, the time is gone and there's still so much more information that you'd like to gather. So huge kudos, especially to Brian and Forrest, who had to put together some pretty impressive presentations, and Matt, of course, too. But I also found it extremely useful to spend and get to know Forrest and Brian more, right? Because at least in the roles that I've held with the AAITA, most of my interactions have been with John and Matt, and not as much with those two. And so it actually filled in, especially since my first year on the board, it filled in a lot of holes of information. I know there's still many holes and some gaping chasms that I still have to fill with information, but it gives me great reassurance that eventually I'll get there, asking a lot of questions And like Jesse alluded to, the staff overall, they've always been phenomenal at answering our questions, even if we ask the same one like over and over again. They're extremely helpful, and it showed in their presentation. So thank you, and I'm glad I really enjoyed this training session.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Oh, Kathleen, sorry, go ahead.
I just want to echo what everyone has said here. And also, I had read in the committee reports, a couple of different people, I think one of them might have been Kyra, had suggested that because we receive so much information and we may not have an appropriate amount of time during board meetings, I would not be averse to having another half-day retreat later on, say in May or June, when things slow down, to get a better handle on things, if that's how the board feels.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. It may be something worthwhile as we go forward, and just the fluid nature of the way things are changing, that might be warranted. But yeah, it's something we can certainly consider at the governance committee and talk about with staff. Kyra, do you have a hand up?
Yeah, I was just going to follow up with that. That was one of my comments in the finance committee meeting. I think it would be helpful. One of the things that we missed in the retreat, just because of time constraints, is the ability to really collaborate together as a board. So that was kind of the piece that I thought would be nice if we did a follow-up, a half day, just to kind of digest all the wonderful information that we were presented, but to be able to talk about it more amongst ourselves and think about how we want to implement all of the ideas and thoughts that were presented to us over the 2 half-day periods. So it'd be nice to do that sooner than later before we forget and it's kind of in the rear view again.
Oh, good thought. All right. Anybody else? Okay. Thanks for that. And like I said, I'm sure this will be a topic of discussion at the next governance committee meeting. We'll try to lay out a plan, work with Matt and the staff to see what follow-up steps we might want to take. And if, sometime in the short to medium term future, we think about another half day, we can certainly talk about that. All right. Then I guess the next item is 3.3, the LAC Task Force Report. We have some materials in the packet starting on page 26, and I will let Ms. Mozak lead us through it. Kathleen, go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman Mahler. So as he just mentioned, in your packet is the policy language for board linkage with the LAC, as well as executive limitation for external relations with the LAC. The task force went back to Rose Mercier along with Matt Carpenter, armed with all of the excellent feedback we got from the governance committee as well as the service committee. And what we came up with was what you see in your packet. And the governance committee and the governance committee and the service committee have both recommended bringing it to the board for your thoughts and possibly implementation. So if anyone has any questions or thoughts or about what you read.
Any questions on the proposed language for the new policy regarding the LAC? It's on page 27 of the packet. I want to acknowledge that Kathleen led this effort from start to finish. Did a tremendous amount of work to organize and get the right result, along with Matt and Rose Mercier. It was a coordination between myself and Kyra and the governance committee and Matt and the LAC. So she was running in a bunch of different directions to pull this off. So a lot of hard work by Kathleen and others went into this. So kudos to her for getting what I think is a very good policy in front of us that will help us solve an issue. Any questions for Kathleen or about the language in general? Okay. Oh, Jesse, go ahead.
Chairman, just has the LAC had a chance to review this or themselves?
This language was not presented to the LAC. They just came back online in February. And that's a really good question, but I guess I didn't pursue that only in that this is language driven by the board. We have gotten a lot of excellent feedback from them in the past. And I know that they're anxious to move forward with policy governance. Their chairman has a lot of experience with policy governance. I think they're just waiting for the board to make their decision so that they can then move forward and have and not be in this cycle of confusion.
Absolutely. And it's not that I have any concerns. I think I know that you are a long-term, that you've been on the LAC before. And so I very much trust you to represent their interests, especially since they haven't been meeting, for obvious concerns during the pandemic. I just wanted to check to see if they had, to see if we could have any of that feedback entered into the record, but I don't have any concerns. But thanks very much for answering my question.
I can tell you that at the last meeting I attended with them in March, I did let them know that there was new policy language and that the board packet was available the week before our meeting, and that if they had any concerns, they were welcome to attend the board meeting. But I don't believe we've had any public comment from them at this point.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Then I think the next step is for a vote to adopt this and include it in our policy manual. So can I have somebody move this into the record for adoption? Kathleen, seconded by Kyra. All right. If there are no other concerns, then we'll vote by a roll call. Yes or no for the adoption of the language as drafted. Mike?
Yes.
Rich?
Yes.
Sue?
Yes.
Raymond?
Yes.
Roger?
Yes.
Ryan?
Yes.
Jesse?
Yes.
Kathleen?
Yes.
Kyra?
Yes.
And I'm also a yes. So thank you, everybody. That was a lot of work again. And again, all the credit goes to Kathleen for taking this from 0 to 60 in less than 2 minutes. So go ahead. Thank you, Kathleen. All right. Next on our agenda is 3.4, Ownership Linkage Task Force, and a verbal report from Mr. Alamein. I think we'll take it from here.
I imagine most of the board members recall a little more than 2 years ago, we formed Ownership Linkage Task Force. Ownership linkage, to refresh your memory, is to try to have the board engage directly with who we consider to be our owners. Now, in the traditional sense, we don't really have owners, but we consider the three bodies that really create our existence and appoint our board members to be our legal owners, and generally the residents within the communities we serve to be who we would consider our moral owners. The former task force met a number of times with the help of Rose Mercier and developed a plan for doing this linkage. And we followed that up with 3 meetings, one with Mayor Christopher Taylor of Ann Arbor, one with Mayor Beth Brashears of Ypsilanti, and one with Supervisor Brenda Stumbo of Ypsi Township. And they were, I think, pretty good meetings. After that, we decided, the board decided that really the linkage should be the responsibility of the entire board. And the task force, being a task force anyway, was dissolved. But because of pandemic and other things that intervened, basically nothing happened after those meetings. So the task force was reconstituted. The members are, in addition to me, Kyra, Jesse, who were on the original task force, and Rich has joined us too. so far we've had a couple of meetings, and we're going to have a third one soon. Our intent is at the next board meeting to bring to you basically what our consensus is relative to ownership linkage, and to have a dialogue with the board, get their input, what they think about ownership linkage, and in particular, what we should be doing going forward. And so I just wanted to lay that as a groundwork in preparation for our next board meeting when we will be discussing it. But I'll take any questions now if you have.
Okay. Any questions for Mike on next steps with ownership linkage task force, or any other comments from anybody else on the task force at this point? No, thank you, Mike, for leading the effort once again. This is a key pillar of our policy governance, which is the communication with our owners and our ownership linkage, to get their feedback and kind of channel what their desires are into policies to hand off to the staff.
And I forgot to mention, I think, that we think the focus of the dialogue with our owners should try to bring in our ends and have a dialogue on that.
Right.
To see that we're all in agreement or get input about changes.
Right. Any further dialogue on the ownership linkage at this point? Okay. All right, we'll move on then to item 3.5, which is monitoring. We've got our investment policy, which is 2.6. It's in the packet. And we'll get a report now. I guess it's Mr. Metzinger will walk us through it.
Yes. Good evening again. Policy 2.6 is a policy that deals with the authority's cash and investments. This report was presented earlier this month to the Finance Committee, and we had a discussion there. Really, the policy outlines what the board's expectations are for how cash and investments should be handled. We identified cash as being those funds that are needed for short-term operations, whereas investments are monies that we hold for longer-term uses and for reserve funds. So this monitoring report presents compliance with all elements of the policy. It's a short policy, but it says a lot about how cash and investments are managed. The board has set three priorities for the handling of cash and investments. The highest level priority is the safety of the principal, which means that we don't risk the public's money. The second priority is liquidity, or making sure that cash is available so that we can continue to pay for our operations. And third, that we can generate the highest interest yield possible, compatible with the other two priorities. So this monitoring report presents compliance with both the high level policy and also the two lower level policies, which require that cash and investments be held in accounts that are federally protected and that generate interest. And then also we are complying with the board adopted investment policy, which is known as Appendix F in the policy manual. So just to go into a little bit of detail, the report indicates that we had a cash balance of 7.4 million and an investment balance of 11.8 million as of December 31st. And so later on tonight, you'll hear the first quarter financial report presented by Latasha Thompson. And these numbers are consistent with what you'll hear in that report. And then just looking down the road, this report will come back to the board again in August. This was one of those policies that you are very interested to see. And so we'll bring it back again after the third quarter report, and you'll see this again in August. So at this point, I'll return it to the chair for questions.
Any questions on the report or any of the comments that John made? Roger, go ahead.
Yeah, I just have a question on 2.6.2, executive limitations interpretation. On number 1, and this would be on page 33, I believe, of the packet. Certificate about number one, the certificates of deposit not to exceed 4 million in any one financial institution. And then we look at on page 31, on Bank of Ann Arbor, there are 2 certificates of deposit that I believe equal 5 million. Could you explain that?
Me too. Yeah, that's a good question. So you'll notice that those Bank of Ann Arbor certificates of deposits are listed as CDARS. And CDARS is an acronym. It stands for the Certificate of Deposit Account Registry Service. So these funds are managed by the Bank of Ann Arbor, but they are held in certificates of deposit at banks around the country. And so while the sum is 5 million, in each bank, there's a maximum held of $250,000, which is the maximum that's federally insured.
Thank you. I had never heard of CDARS before.
Yeah, it's an acronym not many folks have heard of.
Any other questions? Jesse?
Giving you another opportunity to explain something that might be obvious, but you will treat it with your customary respect. In 2.6.1, the justification is that funds be held in accounts that are federally insured to the level of at least $250,000 per account. And I have concern, is there any limitation about holding money beyond that insured amount in those accounts? Or are those accounts capped at $250,000, or are we keeping an uninsured level of money in some of these accounts?
Yeah, that's a fair question, and thank you for asking it. So there are accounts where we do have accounts that are above that federally insured threshold. And the reason for that is that those funds are treated as an exception to this policy, that there are funds that are held for operations. So policy 2.6.1 says that it's an executive limitation that says that operating cash or surplus capital needs to be held in federally insured checking accounts, except where necessary to ease in operational transactions. So we do have cash on hand in our operating checking accounts, and that's available for when we pay bills or when we write payroll. And oftentimes those check runs will top more than $1 million. So it is important that we do have cash available, and it's held under this exception within this policy.
Jesse, any follow-up?
I just, so you might now be able to identify my response to the survey, and just I guess maybe this is a question to the board on, is this, having on the purpose of this policy seemed to be making sure that we were not taking on financial risk, and that the way we kind of are mitigating that risk is by having the money be insured by the FDIC. But now I'm here, if we're talking about, $1 million, that's, $750,000 that's uninsured. It makes me feel like maybe this policy isn't accomplishing what we're wanting it to accomplish. But I don't know if that's a topic worth discussion or not, or whether this is just my own ignorance of financial matters. But that's my impression of that, of comparing those numbers.
John, if you want to respond to that, is that Jesse's impression is correct?
Yeah, I can see the concern. And so one of the things, Jesse, that I think is important to understand too, is that we're very careful to make sure that we're holding our operating dollars in banks that are fiscally secure. So, and thankfully, Bank of Ann Arbor does have very high rated, by bankrate.com is a good resource you can go to understand how they're capitalized. And you can see that they have far more assets, available that they're not at risk. These funds are not at risk. And it is important to keep our operating funds available so that we can write those big checks. For example, when we do a payroll run, we're writing checks upwards of, well, just shy of $500,000. And so and then occasionally, we'll write a check run just for our ongoing operating costs, and we may spend, more than $1 million in operating costs. So out of all of the cash assets we have, 7.4 million right now is held in banking accounts with Bank of Ann Arbor, as shown on the monitoring report. Some of that's federally insured, and as you point out, some is not.
Any follow-up? Anybody else?
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I think, yeah, I guess that I would defer to what's a common best practice, though it does make me think that maybe the language needs to be adjusted. If the FDIC insurance is not adequate to cover the amounts of money that we need to hold in these accounts, then maybe some justification along the lines of what you were saying like in financially responsible solvent institutions maybe needs to be worded in, that it just seems like the insurance itself is not enough to cover our operating costs, and so it doesn't necessarily make sense to have that as our explicit criteria in this, and maybe that's something that the board should look at, clarifying that language. Obviously we have sound business practices. I'm not worried about the money, but the language just seems inadequate to the just the number of dollars that we're working with. But that's it. I'm fine with this.
That's perhaps something the Finance Committee can take up and discuss. Kyra?
I think I remember it was either in a previous monitoring report, or maybe John, it was when we were talking about changing the investment strategy before, but I believe there was discussion and handouts at some point regarding the ratings of the banks and how you could provide support on the health and safety of the bank. So that might be something that we add to the policy or to the monitoring report at some point.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. This discussion is helpful in that I think we may be able to provide perhaps some additional interpretation and evidence the next time this report is presented that would go along these lines to indicate the fiscal strength of the financial institution.
Okay. Thank you, Kyra. Good suggestion. Any other comments on the 2.6 issue brief? Okay, I think given the materials in the packet, this should be up for a vote. To adopt the recommendation of the staff for full compliance, we have choices: A, in compliance; B, in compliance except for items noted; C, making reasonable progress toward compliance; D, not in compliance or not making reasonable progress toward compliance; or E, cannot be determined. Can I have somebody move to have a vote on one of those five? Mike?
I move we vote A, which is in compliance, and I'll just mention the Finance Committee reviewed this, and that's what we recommend.
Can I have a second? Kyra? All right. Excuse me, then the recommendation is to adopt at in compliance level A. And we'll go through the roll call. Mike?
Yes.
Rich?
Yes.
Sue? Sue, you're on mute.
Sorry, yes.
Raymond?
Yes.
Roger?
Yes.
Ryan?
Yes.
Jesse?
Yes.
Kathleen?
Yes.
And Kyra?
Yes.
And I'm also a yes. So that passes unanimously at that level. Thank you very much. Next in our packet, or next on our agenda, is the 3.6, our monitoring report for communications and support policy. This is policy 210. Starts on page 39 of the packet, and I think Mr. Carpenter will walk us through from
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. So you have, yes, on page 39, monitoring report for policy 210, communication and support to the board. This is only a partial year. This is one of the policies I think that was moved around as part of the rescheduling. The most recent prior one went up through August of 2020. So this is picking up with that one, only a partial year. And from here on, I believe you'll monitor it every 12 months. This is one that goes directly to the board, so it hasn't been seen by a committee yet. I am suggesting level B of compliance for your consideration. I'll hit just a couple of highlights and then be available for your questions. So if you look on page 40, you see the color-coded compliance. I will note that item 210.11 was missing one monitoring report. Because of that, we needed to call it partially compliant. Because that sub-policy was only partially compliant, that means the policy above it is only partially compliant, and that means the entire policy is only partially compliant. Otherwise, there's a lot of green on the board. There, except for two incompletes on page 41, you'll notice section 210.3. There are two incomplete policies here. You may recall several months ago, Rose Mercier noted for us that somehow our policy manual was just missing a section of boilerplate policies pertaining to the board's holism and the CEO's responsibilities with respect to that. For whatever reason, that policy section had just never been included. You did vote to put it into the policy manual a few months ago. Unfortunately, I was able to develop interpretations, but they rely on surveys of you to demonstrate compliance, and we have not been able to execute those surveys. So those are incomplete purely from a timing matter, although I would certainly love to hear your feedback on the interpretations. With that, I'll note 210.14 on page 46. This is about not presenting information in an unnecessarily complex or lengthy form. Many of these rely on your reactions to the information. So we kind of look to you to discern whether or not we're complying with this one. I do want to let you know that although I'm suggesting I'm in compliance on this one, just this last week, one of you did mention offhandedly to me you thought our packets were expanding, becoming quite large, and I can't disagree with that. And so perhaps the governance committee can take up the question of, is there any way to shrink the packets down? Nevertheless, I would say we're in compliance with that one. And then I believe in the comments section on page 59, one of you raised an interesting point about the possibility of conflicts with other transit agencies, maybe being something worth consideration. I'll leave it to you to decide if you think so, but that might best be captured in the external relations policy if you do want to consider that. Other than that, Mr. Chair, I believe the report, although voluminous, speaks for itself, and happy to answer any questions you may have.
Open up for discussion. Any questions or comments on the report or directly for staff on this report, or any comments about the comments that were made from other board members? Okay, Jesse, go ahead.
That actually brought up a comment that I meant to bring up from the previous, the survey on 2.6. Someone had mentioned in the future having monitoring reports come with the identify when the report was scheduled to be due. I will admit it is a bit arduous to go through and check our monitoring schedule. If I think that would be pertinent to this report as well. I think that would be some really helpful information to in answering that question of when was the report submitted when due, which we get asked every time we get a monitoring report. I'm interested in talking about having a discussion of whether how to address being informed of what other transit agencies are up to. I think you bring up an interesting point on whether it belongs here elsewhere, but I think that was a particularly interesting point to me.
Okay, thank you. Any others? Okay, so like the last one, if there's no other questions, we will vote to adopt this at one of 5 different levels. A, for in compliance, B, compliance except for the items noted, C, making reasonable progress toward compliance, D, not in compliance, not making reasonable progress, or E, cannot be determined. Can I have somebody move a level, recommend a level, and move it into the record at what level we should adopt this report? Roger?
I move that we adopted at B, is in compliance except for items noted.
Do I have a second? Kathleen, second. Any other discussion? Okay, then we'll call the roll for the vote. The recommendation is for level B in compliance for items noted. Mike?
Yes.
Rich?
Yes.
Sue? Sue, you're on mute.
Chairman Mahler, Ms. Gott did let me know that she needed to step away for an urgent matter.
Okay. Raymond?
Yes.
Roger?
Yes.
Ryan?
Yes.
Jesse?
Yes.
Kathleen?
Yes.
Kyra?
Yes.
And I'm also a yes, so that passes with 9 votes, and we'll count Ms. Gott as an abstention at this time for level B. Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Matt, for preparing that. We'll move on then to section 4, strategy operational updates from the CEO. 4.1, details of our August service restoration, and it looks like Mr. Yang will take it from here, lead us through that discussion. Go ahead, Forrest.
Thanks, Mr. Chair and board members. As per Matt's email, we're not going to play the 20 minutes video. So hopefully by now you had opportunity to review the materials we shared with you and all watch the video. Just as a quick reminder about the process. So public feedback period will be from March 1st to April 2nd. So public, there are quite a few public town halls being planned for the next couple of weeks. And so far we have met quite a few stakeholders. We haven't heard major concerns. And then by April 2nd, we're going to incorporate all the feedback from the staff, from you, from public into the final recommendations. And then we're going to go back to public again in June for additional public town halls. But at that time, we're more like, for communication purpose. But we do want to collect feedback then, but it's not going to be on time for August service change. It's going to be for future planning cycles. So the service is going to be implemented on August 29th. And then I think that's general process. Before we go to questions, I would like to introduce Ken Anderson. He's our communication and service coordinator. And I will ask Ken to give a very quick summary of what we heard so far.
Go ahead, Ken, whenever you're ready. I think you're on mute.
Seems like Sue and I are on mute tonight. So hello, everyone. I'm Ken. I work with Forrest in the planning department. And we have been receiving feedback over the past several weeks. Our public comment period is open from early March until early April. So far, we have received around 70 individual pieces of feedback. Most of that comes either through the website or email. Then in addition to that, I have 8 or 9 phone calls that we've responded to. The majority of the feedback that we have has been generalized questions about what's happening to my route, what's happening to my bus stop, and kind of requests for information. But there's a couple routes, I believe it's Route 23 and 24 in particular, that have received more comments than other routes. A lot of that is asking for clarifications on exactly what the proposals are. But the majority of the feedback that we have received at this point has either been supportive of the proposals or asking for clarifications. When we get a little bit further along, probably after the public comment period closes, we'll finish compiling a summary sheet, and then we'll provide kind of the statistics on the types of comments that we received, the routes that were the most popular comments, and then that type of information, and then make it available for everybody on the board. So I believe, since we're not going to run through the presentation again, that Forrest and I and Brian, if there are operational questions, will make ourselves available now to answer any questions that you have about the service restoration proposals for August.
Thank you, Ken and Forrest. Any questions from board members for Forrest or Ken, or about the comments or the report? Hopefully everybody got a chance to see the video that's posted for the public. It's on our website, TheRide's website. Any questions from board members or discussion points at this time? Jesse, go ahead.
I'm trying to give someone else a chance to speak first, but most of my concerns are pretty well documented in the service committee report, and thank you, Keith, for keeping such great notes on that. There was one item I want to bring up again, especially because it was also brought up in the finance committee meeting, and about how I don't feel it's being adequately conveyed that these changes are permanent, that this is not a COVID-related service increase. This is in fact a change to our core service that will remain in, until we do another, reworking of our service, that, there is not going to be a return to our pre-COVID service. This is the end game for now. I don't feel like that's being adequately conveyed in the publicity for these materials, and I feel like that is necessary to be included in the publicity for the public to know exactly, for them to even know whether or not they should be commenting on this. In case there is someone who's thinking, well, this is just another temporary service until we're out of COVID. Some people may not realize I'm losing my route, or my route is changing in a way that, like in the long term. So this has been brought up in both service and finance committee. Can staff speak to how that was received and whether how that's being handled?
Forrest, you want to speak to that, or Ken? Go ahead.
Sure. Let me just respond to that. We are, like I said, the public town halls are going to start next week. Certainly, we're going to re-emphasize on that point. But I'm going to ask our communications expert to probably either on the website or do some maybe social media notification, and just to making sure people understand this is a permanent change.
Thank you. I do feel like, I think it is an appropriate term, the service recovery plan. But especially since this is coming, as I think was kind of pointed out, on the tail of several service restoration announcements, the language is very similar. I do think it's going to be important to convey to the public that this is our new map. And I want to make sure that we give them an adequate notice, and so that they know that they need to make the time to have input on this. Thank you.
So I received a message from somebody in community relations. They have been working, the original round of materials that we put out went out before we were able to include that type of language. So, but apparently in the news articles and interviews that they've been giving, they are starting to use that language to reinforce those points as we go forward.
Oh, that's really encouraging to hear. Thank you.
Any other comments, questions for the staff at this point?
Mr. Chair, if I may, I just want to address one of the public comments regarding to FlexRide East.
Sure.
Okay, FlexRide East, actually the service hour is being expanded quite a bit on the weekdays from 6 to 10. On Saturday, it is proposed to be 8 to 9 p.m. and then Sunday is 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. And those service hours basically matching our fixed route services that used to be operated in that neighborhood. Pretty much similar to other fixed route in East Landing. So if I'm not sure if the question is related to the FlexRide East or in general, but again, I just want to clarify. So we do propose to expand service hours, including weekends.
Thank you for that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else? Questions for Forrest or Ken? Generally, Ken, how would you categorize the comments? I mean, you said they were kind of generalized comments about what's happening to a route, what's happening to a service, or something specific like that. I mean, generally speaking, how is it trending in terms of the tone of the comments? Are they just questions at this point, or are we getting specific feedback about what they like or don't like about the service plan right now?
The majority are questions, but there are some people, letting us know that I do like some of the changes that you've made, like simplifying the routes or simplifying the branches and other things like that. And then there are other people saying, where the changes that you're proposing, I kind of like what you already have in place. So, we're going to have to make some balances. We're going to have to kind of figure out going forward when we go into the millage and the long-term plans, if some of the stuff that we did, like the more frequent service on weekends, is that something that in the future is not as part of this plan, but in the future, do we have to revisit those and kind of, balance whether we need to divert resources towards those types of issues as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And generally speaking, what's your communication plan? Is it you generally who gets back to people, and what's kind of the time frame? Do we publish a time frame, or is it just kind of as they come up, ad hoc?
It's more ad hoc. It's a combination of me and there's another person in the planning department named Elise Ostraday. We kind of divided up, and then because we did get pretty swamped at the beginning, we are a little bit behind, but we try to get back within several days, but it is catch up right now. So but with the phone messages, we definitely try to get back to those sooner than we would an email, just because it feels like that those people are, it feels like there's more of an urgency usually if somebody's taking the time to call us.
Okay, thank you. And I assume if there's any board members who have heard directly from the public, they would send those to Matt or, Matt and Forrest, so they could handle those right away.
And every board members are welcome to attend any of the town hall meetings. I believe Kathleen had said she was going to, and then we will recognize and anybody else that wants to show up too.
Great, thank you. Any other questions for for us, Ken, Matt, on this issue? Okay. If not, then we'll close that section and move to the next. The next is 4.2, our first Q1 finance report. I think Ms. Thompson will lead us through the report that's in the packet starting on page 72. So I'll turn it over to Latasha. Go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. Happy to be back with you all this quarter to present the financial results. Thank you, Keith. He's already got it on the screen for us. So with that said, I'm just going to hit the highlights for tonight. I know that the Finance Committee has already saw this and you have to maybe to have some time to look at it in the board packet, so we won't belabor it. But we do just want to go through the operating results and the balance sheet very quickly here. If you look at the operating results, it's ended pretty much how we thought it was going to end, hopefully. For us in the finance department, there was a zero net income for the first quarter. And the revenue and the expenses were at $9.2 million. Year to date, 1.6 million less than the budget. And I just want to hit a couple of reasons for that, the budget variance. So on the expense side, we have, as we all know, a reduced service plan. So with that, there's lower fuel, materials and supplies. And even with the pandemic, we noticed that we have less purchase services as well. And with no TheRide, D2A2, and even the TheRide service coming in-house, that causes all of our expenses to decrease at this point. And so flipping over to the revenue side, the revenue is going to follow the expenses. And so we are not trying to pull our funding when it comes to federal funding for a surplus. We are just trying to cover our costs at this point. You will see that we did pull about 1.6 million in CARES funding for this quarter. We're about 3 million year to date. And I think John will have some more information on our future plans with that later on in his budget update. But for now, this is where we're at with our federal funding. And as well, if you can go back to, I'm sorry, you can go, yeah, thank you. And so also with that and the revenue side, the fares are down quite considerably. They're for the quarter is about $470,000 down. And that was due to the very low ridership that we still have. Fixed route is about 20 to 25% at this point, and the demanded response is about 40%. And then now we can go to the balance sheet. Thank you, Keith. And then, so on the balance sheet side, we had a strong net position, and the reserve balance is at $10.4 million, 2.9 months. And just two things that I want to know on the balance sheet is that the reserve, the months in reserve may look a little strange because the reserve is going down as far as the total dollars, but the months is going up, and that's due to the budget for 2021 being less than 2020. And that's what we calculate that reserve, those months in reserve on. And also on the balance sheet, what I also want to know is, as John stated, that the investments is presented here. It is higher than the prior quarter, and that's due to the CDRS program that there was a discussion concerning. So with that, I will entertain any questions. You can probably X me out of this. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Keith.
Any questions for Latasha or the finance team or discussion? Roger, go ahead.
So on the 9.2 million in revenue and 3 million in CARES Act, if there had been if everything else had stayed the same, there was no CARES Act money, it would have been a $3 million loss or negative for the quarter. Is that correct?
No, not exactly. I may have gotten a little confused by the way I said that, but there was actually 1.6 million drawn for the quarter for CARES. And if it had not been drawn, we would have used other federal funding that we have. We are not using that funding so that we can use up the CARES funding as quickly as we can. So there is other funding available.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions on the quarterly report? I mean, in terms of your forecasting, I guess for coming months, Latasha, do we, maybe this was discussed at Finance Committee. How do we see kind of an incremental increase or decrease or a steady state regarding drawing in CARES Act funding going forward? So in other words, are we kind of seeing it at the same level, or are you forecasting we're going to see it at the same level over the next quarter? Or are we going to be drawing in more or less CARES Act, do you think?
Well, I think John will have more in his update later, but we are definitely aiming to increase the money that we are pulling from the CARES. But he will have more in his budget update, so I don't want to go too much into that. We are not, okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
He's still your boss for the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Okay, any other questions on the quarterly report, finance report? All right, if not, we'll move on to 4.3, the Q1 service report, and we'll turn it over to Brian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The report was in the packet, and would just like to point out that the quarter one is pre-pandemic to pandemic comparison. And if you want to see us, how we're kind of transitioning through the pandemic, you can take a look at the comparison of Q4 to Q1. Also note that this is the last report with pre-pandemic data because as you've heard on the news, I'm sure we've been doing this fund for a year. So with that, I would be happy to entertain any questions anybody on the board had about the report that was in the packet.
Any questions from any board members or any discussion on the report or general topic discussion about this? I know the service committee vetted this pretty well already, so anybody else? Okay. All right. Thank you, Brian. Some very interesting numbers and arrows and large percentage swings in that report. So thank you for that. Then we'll move on to 4.4, the budget update. I'll turn it back over to Mr. Metzinger for his update there.
Yes, good evening again. As Ms. Thompson just presented, we are planning some interesting changes ahead, and we have been discussing some of the ideas recently in board committee meetings. Tonight, rather than packing the agenda full of a lot of detail, what we wanted to do instead was to just speak about the concept at a higher level and provide the board an opportunity to discuss this and ask questions about the financial forecast. So, you know, the concept that we would like to bring forward is to amend our 2021 budget, primarily because we are now with CARES Act funding and CRISA funding, and then of course the potential of American Rescue Plan funding, recognizing with greater confidence that we will be able to spend federal funding more quickly than we had anticipated when the budget was adopted last September. So our concept is going to be to spend a greater share of federal aid more quickly as operating assistance, and then to transfer our local property tax funding into reserve accounts, primarily as a capital reserve for future projects. So this plan would allow us not only to maintain operations for the next couple of years, but also to begin to make exciting progress on capital projects that have long been on our wish list. And so, you know, we're dealing with an available $35 million in federal funds right now between CARES Act and CRISA. And so the plan would involve spending those funds more rapidly this year and next. Just to address some questions that did come up in committee, we have confirmed with our legal counsel that these plans do align with state law. and are also allowable under the federal regulations from grantor relationships in accordance with the board's policy. And it's also aligned with what voters have authorized in our local millages, in that they have elected to support public transportation in the service area through their millage votes. And so clearly capital and operating projects both support public transportation. And then perhaps Matt will be able to share that, we've learned that our approach is consistent with what a lot of other transit agencies of our size are doing around the country, as he's been talking with his colleagues and confirming our approach with others. So what we'll be bringing to the board next month is a detailed plan, along with a resolution and a request for the board's authorization to amend the 2021 budget to make some changes in expenses based upon what has occurred so far this year, minor changes. But the most impactful change is to realign our revenue and the operating budget, using federal aid more promptly, and then creating reserve accounts with local property tax funds for future capital projects. Matt, would you like to add any additional detail before we return to the board for questions?
Sure. Thank you, John. I think John has said it very well. What I would add is that I've spoken to 3 other transit CEOs, 2 in this state, another in another state, just to, bounce the idea off them. What I'm finding is that a lot of other transit agencies are in a very similar situation to us, wondering what to do. And almost all of them are doing something very similar to what John just described. The transit agency in Des Moines, Iowa, whose leader I've known for 20 years, has already done it. They've already begun moving their local property tax funding into a capital reserve. They have a lot of other nuances too, I won't bore you with, but essentially the same maneuver we're discussing. So I'm very confident in John's initial recommendation. There's no federal concern with how we're suggesting this money be moved from one pocket of our own to another pocket. But we do also understand and heard very clearly from some board members, the perception, I think, is really going to matter. And so we're going to want to be clear with the community and with our staff when we bring forward a specific recommendation, hopefully next month, of what we're doing and why. So we've heard that very clearly as well. I think, one last thing. Now is a good time to be pulling together local funding for capital. There's a lot of rumblings out of Washington, D.C. about a forthcoming infrastructure bill and even the potential return of congressional earmarks. It's been many years. Some of us have some experience with those. I'm happy that Board Member Hunter and I are reaching out to Congresswoman Debbie Dingell's office on the subject of earmarks. But there is a very real concern among some CEOs that a flood of federal infrastructure money, if there's no local money to match it, could be difficult to spend. So now would be a good time to be able to have local capital funding to match things. So with that, I think John and I are interested in your feedback, your reactions to his description of this proposal, and looking forward to having a conversation.
Board members, any questions about the approach? Any comments? I mean, personally, I look forward to a more fleshed out plan, but I conceptually very much like the idea of using this and shifting money. Capital money is always hard to come by. It's always precious. And if we can shift stuff to reserve accounts for capital stuff while we spend the gifted money we got from the federal government, great. I think Matt's right. The public perception will matter, but I think once it's well explained, which I have no doubt will do, I can't see a whole lot of objections to the way we've managed. And I think this organization has really done so much over the last several years to engender and manage and maintain the trust of the public when it comes to fiduciary matters. If we don't get the benefit of the doubt by now, I'm not sure when the heck we're going to get it. So I would encourage us to be bold in this respect. So I'll look forward to more details about it. Mike?
Matt, do we have any idea how soon we will have at least a good estimate of the funds we might get from the American Recovery Act? I know it's a huge, complex, signed legislation that lots of people and organizations are trying to figure out.
Yeah, John and I have been attending a series of webinars from industry transit associations. Short answer is probably it's going to take a couple of weeks. There are more formulas being applied to every new bill, gets more strings attached and more limitations placed on it. This particular case, the formulas that they're applying at a federal level limit every transit agency to, I think it's 138% of your annual operating budget, cumulative take from all three relief bills. So someone's got to do that math and calculate all three relief bills that you've received money from and what was your annual operating budget. So they got to do that math for everybody in the country. And then if you're not at 138, I think your money, or if you're over 138, your money spills over to New York, basically. I expect it'll be at least, I hope to have something to tell you in a month, but everything's in the hands of the Federal Transit Administration.
Am I correct in assuming, because next month, we're just talking about amending the current year budget, that really the American Recovery Act dollars don't necessarily have to be part of that budget process?
John and I were discussing how, if and how we could word the budget amendment we're hoping to bring to you next month before we know what, if anything, we're getting from the latest act. The reason being that CARES Act funds and CRISA Act funds technically do not expire. We could be using them 10 years from now. The latest funding expires, I think, in 4 years. Is that right, John?
Yes.
3 years, 4 years? So there's a much greater urgency to use that money faster. So regardless of when, as soon as that money comes in, the pressure will be on us to begin to spend it, because if we don't use it, we will lose it. So that money will move to the front of the queue to get spent first. How exactly that's going to shake out, whether or not we're going to be able to ask for your, if we can find a way to ask for your blessing to do that in a budget amendment next month, we'll do it. If not, it may wait till the next amendment.
Thank you. That was a nuance I didn't understand before.
More strings every time.
Thanks. Any others? Jesse?
I'm very much in favor of this. I've had enough opportunity to ask you questions about this. I'm definitely very happy about it. Our lack of capital investment has been really holding us back. Yeah, when I joined the board, I kind of hoped to be, looking forward to breaking ground on the YTC by now, and for various reasons that obviously, that's still way out in the future. But I'm hoping that this will be speeding up that timeline. I did have one. Maybe it's not a fair question because it asks you to put on your political or look into your political crystal ball. Knowing that the larger transit agencies have not received as great a percentage of their operating budgets from these bills. So this, I think you kind of alluded to this. This seems to be an option that's only open to smaller agencies like ours, whereas the larger agencies are still looking at budget shortfalls, as I understand it. And at any point, stop me if I'm just flat out wrong. Um, should we be prepared for any sort of counter lobbying from the larger transit agencies as they see the smaller transit agencies who got more money than, you know, a larger percentage of their budgets out of this is there going to be a war in APTA for between the larger agencies and the smaller agencies trying to prevent us from doing this?
To prevent us from doing this, no. It is understood, I think, by all APTA members and anyone familiar with federal politics that if you're going to pass a bill at a national level, every district needs an incentive to vote yes. So even though New York is important, and even though I certainly want them to succeed, they couldn't get a federal rescue bill if they tried to hoard all the money. That said, the war, so I'm not concerned about clawbacks, they're sometimes called, nor am I concerned about any legal challenge to the proposal John's outlined. The war you're alluding to has already occurred. And if you want more inside baseball, I can tell you about it. But essentially, the CARES Act funding was the first, and it went fastest, and everybody got kind of an equal slice. The larger systems needed more. And so we began to see with CRISA and now with the rescue plan money, more of these formulas being applied to put a cap on how much you could receive. With CRISA, it was, for example, a shock to many of us at the state association to learn that, you know, for example, Ann Arbor got funding, Lansing got funding, but Saginaw didn't get any funding. And that's just because of how the formula had worked out. They had gotten so much under CARES in round one that they didn't qualify to get anything in round two. I imagine they will qualify to get something in round three because the ceiling cap was much lower. So the cumulative effect of this, I believe what we're seeing is the impact of lobbying, and I think a certain rational discussion in Congress to make sure that this money goes to larger cities who have systems that, you know, you can't shut down Chicago as easily as Saginaw shut down, for example. New York, you can't shut it down. So they have to keep running and burning through money. So to a degree, I think it's legitimate, but there is always a tension in APTA between very large urban systems and smaller systems. That's just something they have to manage and balance every day. We see it in the state association too.
And thank you for clearing that up. I would love to hear about the inside baseball on that. But yeah, I'm so excited about this potential, so that we can satisfy the needs that we have and maybe even expand to better serve our communities. There seems to be so much potential here.
Yeah, but I did want to say one thing because Mr. Miller has mentioned his frustration with timelines before, and it really reminded me, something I should probably say to all of you. When it comes to capital projects, those of us in the industry, we really think in terms of 5 to 10 years. These things do not happen fast. It's, I've rarely seen a project happen in 3 years. So even with the IPSI terminal, we're years away from a ribbon cutting. And I know that might be disappointing. We all want it today. But when you think about numerous rounds of funding approval, local negotiations over land, NEPA, National Environmental Protection Act studies, there are just so many hoops that have to get jumped through and so many actors that need to check boxes. It can take quite some time. So I don't want anyone to, I don't want to disappoint anyone, Jesse, but I also want to be realistic with you guys that, the first IPSI Transit Center probably took 10 years to get built. Hopefully we'll be able to do this one a lot faster. But you know, these are long haul projects. They don't happen overnight.
Any other questions, comments? For my part, I think just one quick comment, and it should be noted that, you know, we're in the position we're in to make these kind of adjustments and moves because of the early budget decisions we made in this pandemic, i.e. being very conservative with our CARES Act money, being very conservative with cost cutting. We didn't bleed out like some of the larger, you know, transit agencies did and then go begging for money and play a game of chicken with the government. You know, we're in this position we're in because of the wise decisions of the staff and the board to, you know, take a very conservative approach to our cost cutting and the way we spent our money early in this. So I think a lot of credit goes to, you know, of course, Matt and John, but also the board to, you know, provide that guidance and put us in this position where we can, you know, shift some money over to some reserve accounts and some capital funding to meet those needs going forward. So give ourselves a pat on the back for that. Anybody else? Okay, then we'll move on to 4.5, the CEO report, and I'll turn it over to our CEO.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to ask Deputy CEO Smith to speak for just a minute and elaborate on the new vaccine shuttles that began operating this week. Brian?
Certainly. We are pleased to be offering a vaccine shuttle. We had been contacted by the health department saying that they had heard that there were transportation issues with people getting to the EMU Convocation Center. And so we put together a multi-layered plan where we're offering essentially it's a deviation of the four, a shuttle between BTC and YTC and a stop in the middle at EMU. And that's running from 10 to 4 Wednesday through Saturday, which is what the open days of the clinic are right now. For those who couldn't get there on that fixed route shuttle, we're offering an A-Ride service that we've been offering throughout to anybody that did have an appointment, but we've made that fare free and paying for the fares via CARES Act. And then there were also folks that were outside of the A-Ride area, and we have gotten FlexRide on board. The providers there, Golden Limousine, were great to work with, and we're able to spin up additional service so that we can provide service in some of the surrounding townships to get people to get vaccines. So very happy to have started that this Wednesday, and look forward to being, you know, if ever there was a reason to spend CARES Act funds, I'd say that would be it. So the team that I get to work with at TheRide was awesome. And frankly, the other vendors that we called in to help us, our software vendors, our providers, it was really a great thing to be a part of, to see it all come together so quickly.
Thank you, Brian. I just want to pause for a moment and see if any board members have any question for Brian on this sort of emergent opportunity.
Matt, I sent you the email, but I just wanted to say that I think the shuttle was great. And I was really proud that TheRide was involved in that. And Brian, thanks for your effort. I just think it's just such a great demonstration of leadership and stepping up. So just want to express my appreciation publicly as well as I did in my email. So thanks to everyone on staff for that.
Thank you. It was a all hands on deck effort, and it came off very well.
Thank you, Brian. Matt, anything more?
Sure. Just I want to give a few more updates on some things that appeared in the written report. Certainly, I want to compliment Forrest's team on the service restoration work, as well as the communications team. Jesse Miller and the team made a presentation to Ypsilanti City Council the other day. And so I think we're well on our way, and I'm actually very proud of the professionalism that's been displayed there. Air ride service is getting back up and running. The upshot here is the service is coming back. It's going to look very, very similar to what it was before. There's going to be an interesting twist, and I'm still sorting it out, and I'll bring you more information as it gets finalized. But essentially, the private company that operates the buses that are coming from Lansing through Ann Arbor to the airport, that's Michigan Flyer and Indian Trails. They have found a pot of state money to backstop their operations. So they're not being funded by us. As a result, at the same time, our contract with them naturally expired during the pandemic. So as they bring it back, they do not need financial assistance from TheRide, which is good. But we won't have a contract with them per se either. We're still going to have them stopping at the Blake. It's still public transportation. The general public is still obviously the market they're targeting, but it's going to look a little bit different in that regard, at least for a temporary period. We're still sorting that out, but this is going to be, I think, sort of an interim thing for maybe 12 months as the market for air travel stabilizes. They'll find their market coming back, and hopefully that'll all settle back into something more familiar. But more information will be forthcoming, but the good news is the service is coming back. I also made a presentation this afternoon to the board of the RTA, Regional Transit Authority. They had asked all of the transit agencies to just provide brief updates. And so the joke is when your agency's acronym is AAATA, you always go first when they go alphabetically. No one's ever going to be in front of you. So I got to go first. And I followed up with an ask of them very directly, very pointedly. I asked them to restart the Detroit to Ann Arbor service, in part because the University of Michigan has announced its intent to return to in-person classes this fall. And that was a good chunk of the reason for the D2A2 service. Another chunk was actually our local health department. They had asked us, once Brian had done such a great job getting people to the vaccination site locally, they asked us if we could take people to Ford Field in downtown Detroit, which is a little out of our way, but perfect for the D2A2 service. So I kind of put the RTA board on the spot this afternoon, and I'm hoping maybe the nudge is what they need to restart that service. The transit-oriented development zoning work at the bottom of the first page, it's going well for us, and I had another good conversation with city staff today. Looking forward to that. If you are curious about how that's going, the Planning Commission, Ann Arbor Planning Commission, will be meeting on April the 6th for a public hearing on it, and I suspect they will forward it on to City Council for their blessing. And then maybe in closing, I'd just like to address Mr. Pulowski in the public comments, and I do think we should follow up with an email to him. He's becoming a regular contributor to our public comments. He made a comment about Nova buses that I just would like to clarify for you. We still only have the one, although I understand our head of maintenance, Candace, is at the factory right now doing quality checks as the next generation of these buses come off the line. So we will have more, probably by summer. What Mr. Pulowski was describing is not the vehicle so much as it is the seating configuration. He mentioned that he likes the older Gilligs because they have more seats, and the Nova seems to have more room for wheelchairs. That's the brand of bus is irrelevant. That was a conscious decision about how the seats themselves are configured. Some people don't realize this. We can have the seats set up in almost any configuration that we like in the bus, including no seats at all, or seats only along the wall facing inward. We can do anything we like. So we made a conscious decision about that. And we certainly appreciate his feedback. If we get a lot of people saying something similar, we may revisit the configuration. But we've also heard some positive things about the extra room for standees and strollers. So we certainly are willing to speak with them, and I will try to find his email and reach out. So with that, Mr. Chair, I think that's all maybe I would update on the CEO report. And if there are any questions, happy to do my best to answer.
Any questions for the CEO on his report this evening? Yeah, please keep us apprised on the whole RTA thing. That will be interesting to watch. If not, we'll close out that part, go to section 5, emergent business. Any emergent business that wasn't on the agenda that we need to be aware of from anybody? If not, then we'll go to item 6, closing items. Topics for next meeting is our policies that will basically be our, governance policies 3.0 to 3.8 up. And I'm sure we'll have more feedback on maybe perhaps the board retreat follow-up on the next agenda as well.
Budget.
Go ahead, Mike.
I just said the budget.
Yeah, the budget, sorry, thank you. Yep. Anything else that we forgot before we come up? All right. Move on then to 6.2, public comment. And we'll see if anybody wants to, they can address the board again for up to 3 minutes. Hit the raise hand button or *9 if you're on your phone. And you can address the board and state your name for the record. You can address the board for up to 3 minutes. Mr. Book, do we have anybody who's waiting to address the board this evening?
Thank you, Chairman Mahler. Yes, we do. We have Mr. Jim Mogensen. Mr. Mogensen, you've been unmuted.
All right. So this is Jim. So so one thing I don't, this is one of these challenges that relates to, it's out of the ride's control in some ways. And that is the fact that the local papers and investigative reporters are not digging into a lot of topics. I don't expect the ride to send out a press release that says the ride is hereby eliminating the Gold Ride sedans for seniors, right? But that may be the only way. The paper hasn't picked up on that yet. And the only reason that matters is not because I'm trying to, my sense is that when people start rethinking about how senior transportation is going to happen post-pandemic, they're going to go, I didn't realize that that happened. And the other thing I want to say is about Uber. So I was one of the few people who actually went to a taxi board meeting. So one of the things about taxis is that you had some understanding of what the fares were going to be. And there were also some backstops if people were being discriminated against. With Uber, that's not the case. You can be canceled if you're not the best, and fares can go to surge pricing. And you need technology, and you need to have a credit card. So there are a number of things that are barriers where there's this disconnect between things. So as always, thank you very much, and I will be in touch. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. And Keith, do we have anybody else who wants to address the board at this time?
Yes, we do. We have Ms. Michelle Barney. Ms. Barney, you've been unmuted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Good. All right. The first is a very brief. I didn't know John Metzinger was leaving, but I want to add my praise to everybody else's because John has been very kind to explain financial things to me and suggest things I could read so that I understand your financial discussions better and can listen more informed. And I'm very happy. Thank you, John. We will miss you. Now, the issue about Flex East, you have enough money, that's wonderful. But it's way too far. It lets you off on Michigan Avenue, and the problem is, from there, I have an 8-block walk to my home in the evening, in the dark. That's not something I feel safe as a woman doing. Is there any hope that they will extend that bus system to include an area nearer Chichester?
If that's a question for discussion, I'm sure we can have the staff reach out to you about that.
And I'm very glad you mentioned that these things are a look at permanent planning, because a lot of things that don't matter if it's another 3-4 months matter a lot if this is the way the system is going to be. One good thing, I'm glad you're restarting Route 66. For the people who live above Packard, that's very important because they haven't been able to walk to Kroger's or any of the stores along that line. And for me, I've had no way to get from Myers up to anything, banks or whatever I'm doing. I have to use an A-ride every time. What were you talking about with this vaccine shuttle? Where was that going? I didn't catch that.
We can have the staff reach out to you with more details about that, Michelle.
Because I found when I finally got up to be able to make an appointment with U of M, that I had no way to get to where they are because they're using the stadium, and you can get there, but without a car, you can't sit in line waiting for your turn. That's really quite a problem. All right, now I don't know who in the staff I should expect a call from, but I hope that somebody will get back to me because sometimes they haven't before. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. Keith, do we have anybody else who wants to address the board at this time?
No, we do not, Chairman Mahler.
Okay. Thank you. We'll close the public comment period. Section 6.3, our board assessment of the meeting. It's in your packet. Please fill that out when you get a chance after the conclusion of the meeting. And 6.4 is adjournment. Can I have somebody move to adjourn? Rich, seconded by Roger. Going once, going twice. Okay. Roll call vote. Mike?
Yes.
Rich?
Yes.
Sue?
Yes.
Ray?
Yes.
Roger?
Yes.
Ryan?
Yes.
Jesse?
Yes.
Kathleen? You just nod or give us a thumbs up if you want. That's all right. That's a yes. Kyra?
Yes.
And I'm also a yes. Thank you, everybody, for an excellent meeting. John, happy trails. See you soon, hopefully. Thank you,
all.
everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.